Hello. Thank you so much for making the time. Can we start off with introductions? Can each of you introduce yourselves?
My name is Jessica LaFour. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the law school here at Michigan. I normally teach first-year legal research and writing and sometimes an upper-level writing class, and obviously also got lovingly brought into the Immigrant Justice Lab a few years ago.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Jesse Hoffman-Garskoff. I'm professor of history at Harvard University, but up until 2022, I was a professor of history and of American culture at the University of Michigan, and I was one of the instructors who developed the Immigrant Justice Lab.
My name's Amy Sankarin. I'm also a clinical assistant professor at University of Michigan Law School. I'm the externship and pro bono director for my main job, and I teach Immigrant Justice Lab with Jessica and Jesse for the last, we just finished our 6th semester.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about the Immigrant Justice Lab. That is why we're all here today. So if you could just start by telling us a little bit about the course.
So the course at its basis, at its most basic is it's a course that's shared between the law school and the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, which is actually somewhat unusual at the University of Michigan. And so there are law students and there are undergraduate students, many of whom are from history, but they are also sometimes from other fields, who are put on teams with both undergraduates and law students on the same team to work together to solve a problem. And the problem is how to provide assistance to, really how to help draft an asylum brief for a kid, usually kids, but sometimes adults too, who are in Michigan and need protection so that they're not sent back to danger in their home countries. And so the teams work in support of attorneys who work with a local partner agency, a nonprofit agency called the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center. And the class is really designed to try and teach teams of students to work towards this goal of producing a draft.
I'll just add that it is, in fact, there are no undergrads at the Michigan Law School other than the 8 undergrads who are invited to be a part of this course. So it's 8 law students and 8 undergraduates in one space. We usually use a room in the law school. And the students are producing a brief by the end that many of them have never done before. Some of the law students have, but most of the undergraduates have not encountered legal argumentation before. And they're helping an unaccompanied minor, hopefully, get relief that they're seeking.
And how did all of this get started?
Oops, sorry.
You're going to look at me again.
We are.
This all started, when I was teaching at the University of Michigan, now I teach the same course at Harvard. I teach a course to undergraduates on the history of immigration law. And it's really a kind of a history of the present class. The idea is to engage students in a question that's really important in their lifetime, a political, legal question, by helping them to think about the tools of legal history and thinking about the history of the law that we now see, how we see it operating today. And in that class, from the beginning, I've been really interested in trying to help students, many of whom want to become practitioners, to have some contact with practitioners who are working in the field. And so for the first several years, I had a partnership with the Human Trafficking Clinic at the law school. And the students got to kind of look at some cases from the past that the clinic had seen in the past. And we would take the names and all identifying information out about those cases, and the students would get a couple weeks with an instructor from the Human Trafficking Clinic to look at. The Human Trafficking Clinic, for various reasons, we weren't able to continue to work with them, and I was in the market for a new experience and met some of the attorneys, the amazing attorneys at the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, and just said to them, hey, I've got 70 students at the end of a semester. They're super fired up. They want to do something. They want to get a little experience. We'll come move boxes. We'll file papers. We'll do whatever you want. And they very smartly and quickly said, what we could really use help with is country conditions. So just to step back, people who aren't familiar with asylum, the asylum is a benefit that you can get to not be deported to your home country if you can show that you would be harmed because of something about your identity in that home country, or that you would face persecution. That requires actually a lot of information about the home country, right? So the claim that somebody makes about what's happening to them has to be backed up with objective facts about what's going on in the home country, which are not easy for practicing lawyers who have not been trained to find out things about foreign countries, but also have very, very little time because they've got enormous caseloads to do. And so it actually matches very well with the kinds of skills that undergraduate students have. It's was this kind of great moment because so much of community-based learning, one of the challenges is how to try and figure out how to actually put students in charge of tasks that are actually appropriate to their skills, and that are the same kinds of tasks that we're seeking to teach in a classroom, rather than a task that is either beyond them or just not at all relevant to the kind of learning that they're doing. So for the first rendition, we just added a 2-week portion to a large lecture class that was actually already a flipped class. So there's a lot of project work going on. But one of the projects was we have 11 children. They each have a particular story. We want to basically just go out and scour the various kinds of scholarly and non-scholarly databases that we get to find out information. And then we will just hand that information over with a cover memo to the attorneys, and they'll do with it what they want. And we'll give them all the materials. So that was successful in some ways and unsuccessful in others. And we decided that that more time needed to be taken to teach the skills, and more time needed to be taken to process the material. And we were able to basically, make use of an opportunity within the history department to have a small seminar the following fall to invite some of the students who had done the best with that first experience back and experiment just with undergraduates, just working on country conditions. And that went way better. I mean, we still didn't do very good work, but we did work that was good enough that it took less time for the lawyers to support us in it and to trust us with it than it would have to do the work themselves. So they did come out ahead in the game. And as a result of our first presentation of country conditions, they said, well, would you be interested in actually writing this up rather than just giving us a big pile of materials? Would you actually write up that section? And that's kind of where this whole began, because once we started doing that, it became clear that to our partners that it would be really cool to also have the legal sections written up. But undergraduates couldn't do that, and I couldn't supervise law students to do it because I'm not a lawyer. So I went to friends at the law school and said, hey, what can we do to try and figure out how to support law students to do this work? And that's where I was referred to Amy.
So Jesse had this whole idea, and originally Bridget Carr, who'd been your partner at the Human Trafficking Clinic, brought me in, and the first iteration we taught in fall of 2019. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Fall of 2019 with the 3 of us. So we had the 8 law students and the 8 undergrads, and we took the model of just country conditions up a step, and we did try to do 2 briefs in one semester, which was a heavy lift. And so we've backed off of that. We just do 1 brief now, and that's where it's been sent. So Bridget had to step out of it after fall of 2019. So in fall of 2020, I recruited Jessica, who hasn't gotten to talk yet. So,
yeah, and and when I came in, I think one of the things that that I was able to bring to the table, which while my colleagues are amazing professors and amazing in what they do, my specialty is in writing, and so one of the things that is really important, obviously, when you're writing a brief, is how do you do the writing, and how do you actually do the legal writing, which is a unique style of writing that even the law students aren't always completely adept at this point in their career, and particularly, obviously, the undergrads have absolutely no experience with. And so I was able to bring a lot of the work that I do with my first-year law students and be able to bridge a gap between the upper-level law students and the undergraduate students.
Great. And you kind of already discussed your relationship with a community partner and how that organically got started. Can you share a little bit more about the community partner and then how that relationship continued to evolve as you had more experience with the course and taught it for further semesters?
So I'll say that the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center has been a really amazing community partner. One of the things that's really hard when you're trying to do an experiential course with a partner who has a permanent caseload is trying to navigate the space of trying to get work done on the timeline that fits the timeline for students, that might not always necessarily meld with the timeline for the attorneys. And our partners at Merck have been really great at sort of trying to find the balance, finding the right attorneys who want to take on this job, trying to plan ahead and sort of help us walk through various dates so that we can set all those timelines. And then they're just also really amazing in helping us find other ways to support them. So one of the things is beyond the course itself is that the Immigrant Justice Lab is a broader project that is grant funded. And so we have the opportunity to do things even beyond just the class and further supporting the work of Merck, the short version of Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, in doing a number of projects that help further their goals of helping the immigrant community.
I'll just add that they're very creative at how to use outside resources. I think they have to be, but I don't know that every nonprofit is as adept at it as they are. They're very good. And the other piece that's a challenge for them is how do you have people work alongside the case with the model often with nonprofits is that the law students and their professors take the case and keep the representation for the life of the case. So we have a lot of clinical experiences where that's what you do. The professors become the attorneys of record and the students first share the cases. Well, this is a little different. We can't really do that beyond the life of the semester. We can't keep these cases. And so how can we carve out a piece of a case that we can hand back to the attorneys and add value, as Jesse was talking about, because we don't want to do something that doesn't at least take less time than it would have taken them to work on. So we don't want to make more work for them, is what I'm trying to say. We want to make less work for them. And so how can we do a piece of a case that is a bite-sized semester, fits in a semester piece of a case, and then hand it back so that we're not the attorneys of record? And that's kind of that isn't possible in every legal space, and it fits really nicely in the asylum space. And it's all due to the creativity of Jesse coming to them and them coming to Jesse, and then thinking even more and more broadly about how else could we support them. So I just think they're good at that. They're really creative.
I'll just go back to the kind of descriptive question about what Merck is. So Michigan Immigrant Rights Center is a nonprofit that has 3 offices in the state. And what they have grant funding, and they basically all grant funding to provide no-cost legal services and advocacy for immigrants. So if you think about the way that legal aid works, there are a number of agencies that are funded through grants or through government funding to provide services, legal service to people who can't afford them. So in housing, elder care, a whole range of things, people who are maybe innocent and in prison, all kinds of things. Most of those exclude they don't necessarily exclude immigrants, but they exclude immigrants from getting free services on behalf of their immigration case, right? So they might be eligible if they have a criminal case for a public defender, but they can't get a public defender for an immigration case. So what Merck has done, and really only over the last 15 years, has been to step into that space, and they provide everything from just a hotline that anyone can call. They have hotlines in the immigration detention centers. They do advocacy. They have a help desk in the court in the immigration court in Detroit. They have a team that basically they have a team that works on violence against women cases. So they have and then they have a team that works on immigrant labor rights cases. All of that. Unfortunately, in the current moment, the need has grown so great that it's a really expanding field. And there's not necessarily lots of funding to expand it, but they're getting funding to expand in different kinds of ways. The area that they have had the most rapid expansion is in their defense or their representation of unaccompanied children. So there's a large number of unaccompanied children coming into the United States who need legal support. That is the only category of immigrant who actually gets government help help from the U.S. government to defend their cases. And so that grant has come into the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, and that has led to an enormous growth. And the growth has been an opportunity. but it also means that they're continually facing a growing need, and that this was the group of people who first said to us, we could use help with the country conditions, because all of a sudden, in 2014, all of a sudden they had, hundreds of cases that they were trying to deal with in a team of 2.
Yeah, awesome. And getting into the details of the course, I know it's a team-based learning course. You mentioned students work in these teams. Can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to have students working in teams?
I think we decided that because the brief has 2 main parts, there's the legal part and there's the country conditions part, it really lent itself to giving it to a team of students, one of whom could be an expert on country conditions and one of whom could be an expert on the legal side. I will say the very first time we tried teaching the law students the country conditions part and the undergrads the writing, and to empower them. And then the second semester we decided, no, we're going to have everyone lean into their background and their strengths. And so it just naturally, there really are 2 distinct parts, and we've brought in these 2 separate sets of expertise. And so the law students can focus on the legal writing, and the graduate students can focus on the country conditions. And then we made them teams of 4, 2 law students and 2 undergrads, just to give the each piece of the team more support. These briefs are long, and I've said in class this semester several times, this isn't entry-level legal writing. This is actually fairly complicated, higher-level legal writing that you would not necessarily start out with if you were going to progress in a natural progression from kind of bite-sized, easier legal questions to more complicated ones. And so the team piece just felt like it would give the undergrads support from each other and the law students support from each other, and they could, help each other, because the briefs themselves end up being 50, 60 pages with lots and lots of attachments beyond those pages. So I don't know what anyone else would like to say about teams.
No.
I would just add, so in the first instances, it seemed obvious to do teams, partly because throwing really complicated tasks at individual undergraduates, you just don't know exactly who's going to be able to rise to the occasion, and you really want to give people the opportunity to learn aspects of it, even if they can't manage the whole. The other thing is just as a management question, as a faculty member, if you have 16 students and you had them each do 16 separate tasks, you would have to manage which tasks each of them was going to do. Whereas if you've taken on 4 big tasks and then you give them the opportunity to manage who's going to do all the smaller tasks, it just makes more sense organizationally. And that then leads to a second realization, which I think is something that maybe you guys already knew this, but I came to over time, which is that it's not just that teams are a tool that we use in order to get the work done. Teams are actually one of the things that we're trying to teach, right? So in fact, I've said this to students who complain about the teamwork, there's almost no professional opportunity that you're going to have in the future in this field, where you won't be working with people who have more experience than you and people who have less experience than you. And you're going to need to figure out how to work together productively and to think about what kind of a team member you want to be and what kind of skills you need to develop in order to be a good team member. And once we realized that being an effective member of a team was one set of skills that we wanted to try and teach, it actually became much easier to do that work, because we didn't feel like we were taking time away from content to talk about process. We thought this is actually some of the content of the class. There's
very few. Law school is a pretty solitary endeavor, and I remember undergraduate being the same. But there's very little work in the legal world post law school that isn't at least somewhat collaborative, if not completely collaborative. I mean, it doesn't, private law firm, nonprofit, government, it's all collaborative. And so it feels odd to me at how individual law school is all along the way. And that's not true in the clinical space. Teams are a feature, not of the clinical side of things. But otherwise, it's pretty, you do your reading, you go to class, and it's pretty solitary. And so this is not that realistic, and we want to make sure, for all of those reasons, but it makes sense to us that it's in teams, because this work is usually in teams.
And I would just say that, obviously the need for learning how to work in teams and being adept at working in teams has always been something that everybody needs, but I think even more pronounced in the post-COVID universe. I think, trying to rebuild these skills for a lot of students who have lost a lot of time and have been isolated for a long time, I think it's extraordinarily important. And I don't think this was necessarily the impetus from why we went from having 2 briefs a semester and trying to churn out 2 briefs a semester to doing just 1 brief a semester. But I do think that it is dovetailed nicely into doing that, because it's allowed us to build in more time in the semester to help build these things that sometimes I call soft skills. Amy does not like when I call them soft skills. I totally understand that. But the idea is all these skills that are not necessarily, firm, obvious skills that are going to be taught on a daily basis, but that are super important to your ability to be a good colleague and a good supervisee and a good supervisor in the future.
I really appreciate that reflection on how the teams and having students work in teams builds up those skills that are so necessary to have when you're leaving the academic space. I know you mentioned students complaining about teams. So there are 2 things that often we hear that are really difficult when people imagine putting students in teams. And that is students not appreciating that opportunity. And then the other piece is actually, how do you form that and manage that? And how do you be intentional about putting students in teams? How did all of you approach that?
So I will say one thing that we've done in the last couple of iterations that was not very obvious from the course before is we sort of rewrote our course description to make it very clear that this is a team-based course, so that people knew what they were getting into when they were coming in, rather than sort of registering for the course and being surprised by it. And then the other piece in terms of how we form the teams, we've become over the iterations of these semesters much more intentional about having students as they come into the course reflecting on what their previous team experiences have been, what they see as their strengths as a team member are, what they see as their weaknesses, and then using those things along with some other criteria, including experience with immigration previously, or language experience, and different levels of students where they are in their coursework, as ways to sort of try to form the teams based on that, so that we get a distribution of students who we think will work well together.
We don't get much complaining after the teams have gone through the semester. We get some complaining. I think it helps that we're intentional in the course description now, but we get some complaining at the beginning, or some trepidation at the beginning, because people's experiences with teamwork have not always gone well. I don't think there's anybody in IJL who's like, I wish I could have done this whole brief all by myself and not had to work with these people. Not all of our teams have been successful, but I don't think that the concept of teams is one that we get any complaints about at the end, because I think they see that it just was too heavy a lift for one person and it wouldn't have worked at all. So I think we set the expectation that there will be teams, and then we're very intentional at the beginning about asking them about their experiences with team dynamics and having them do some readings and set some team norms around how to interact with each other. We just don't get any complaints at the end. I wish this course had been an individualistic thing. We get a lot of comments from the undergraduates, surprised, because they were very trepidatious at first about how their grade would be based on the team, and that they were really worried about the teamwork piece of things and how it would affect their grade, because that's something that they've been focused on pretty understandably in every course. And at some point during IJL, they have this realization that the grade is completely secondary to the work they're trying to do, and it's a really nice thing that they come to this realization that the work is more important than the grade they get, and they care more about doing a really good job for this client. They feel this huge responsibility to do a good job for the client, and the grade is just kind of a thing that happens in the background, which is absolutely where we want to be. Grading's not our favorite piece of this whole thing at all. And we get that reflection from undergraduates a lot.
Just 2 other thoughts. I mean, one is we've also been, the course it's super fun for many reasons, but one of the reasons why it's really fun is that the students it attracts are actually from a really diverse cross-section of the University of Michigan population. And so from the beginning, we've been also really attentive to trying to form groups in such a way that we don't leave anybody in a one-of situation where there are groups of 4, and you could easily imagine a situation in which just by if you were just working randomly or even thinking about all these other things, you could be the only student of color in a group, or you could be the only woman in a group. And because we have such a great and diverse group of students, it's really easy for us to create a situation in which that's not the case, but it still takes some attention. And it actually has worked, I think. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that although the grading is in the background, it's also really important that we do assign a grade to these skills, right? So that we do ask students to be performing clear tasks that we can assess in this way. They're not as clear as some of the other, they're not soft, but they are. It is a significant portion of their grade whether or not they're acting, professionally with their team. We have them reflect regularly on the rest of their team, confidentially, but we then take that very seriously and respond to it. We also have midterm meetings individually with each of them, just as if they were on a team in a law firm, where we go over what other people have been saying about them in their team, and talk with them about what issues they may be having around the teamwork. So all of those things communicate. It's not just that this is an expectation. It is an expectation. It's also something that we're keeping track of. And I think for the students for whom the trepidation is, what if somebody else in my team behaves badly? Right. I'm not so worried that I'm not going to do my work, but I'm worried that I'm going to end up doing a lot of work and other people are not going to show up, which, is a kind of a risk in a team-based setting, that you're going to get somebody who really just free rides and there's nothing you can, they feel better about it because they know there's a space for them to be reporting on that if it comes up, and they can give us feedback about that. And frankly, we'll get to grading. I think the one thing that you can absolutely do to get a bad grade in this class is to behave badly to your team.
So much came up there that I want to ask follow-up questions about. So I'm going to try and keep it in order. I want to go back to grading, but you did say you pay a lot of attention to how you're forming those teams at the beginning. Do you use any tools that assist you with that, or any tools that help you with the check-ins? Or checking on the health of your teams?
Well, so I guess it depends on what you mean by tool, but we have definitely used your assistance in trying to figure out what kinds of questions we should be asking students to try to get the information that we want out of them. So, our actual physical forms are really just like Google forms that we then sort of, develop and have them, and we've tried different iterations of it because obviously they have 3 other team members that they're supposed to be reflecting on. So the first few iterations made it very hard to parse out who was talking about whom at any one time, but we think we figured out that logistical hurdle. But otherwise, it's just really just a matter of the kinds of questions that we're asking. We're generally asking students in those kind of reflections, how do you feel about your own preparation for your work? How do you feel about your own participation? How do you feel about your own ability to sort of manage the dynamics of the team? And then we sort of ask similar questions of them of how are you feeling about these categories of things about each one of your teammates, and then any supplemental feedback that they might have at the end. And as Amy suggested, I think one of the other things that's really helpful for the students, not necessarily in forming the teams, but in really ensuring out the gate that the teams feel like they're going to be manageable, is this idea of one of our first lessons is giving them readings and a couple of videos about different team dynamic issues, and the idea of developing a group of norms around the way your team is going to operate, and allowing the students to come together and talk to each other about what they have reflected on before, about their strengths as a team member and potentially some of their weaknesses, and then come together and form team norms about what they expect of each other and what they are going to bring to the table. Because I think students a lot really enjoy, one of the norms that they consistently come up with is that we're all going to be receptive to constructive feedback. We're not going to take things personally. And I think saying that out right from the outset really helps them actually do that as the semester goes on, and be able to sort of, talk to each other freely about challenges that they're having without people starting to get defensive.
And I think your question was also about the formation of the teams. Once again, it's a Google form at the beginning, just trying to get as much information about students as we can. It's a little bit of an art, not a science. I mean, we're not sure how the teams are going to play out, but we do think about the diversity of the teams. You do not have to have any background whatsoever in anything to be in this class. Often students have taken Jesse's history of immigration class, but now that he's not teaching it here, there's no one class that prepares you for Immigrant Justice Lab. And so the undergrads come from a variety of backgrounds, and the law students all come, they've certainly come from, they have different majors, and they've had different summer jobs, and they have different career aspirations, and they've taken a bunch of different classes. And so you don't have to have experience, but we often attract students who have some experience. And so we try to distribute them among the teams. And then we often, not always, need language skills. We often, not always, have our unaccompanied minors are Spanish-speaking children from Spanish-speaking countries. And while we don't meet the children directly, being able to read the sources in the language is always very useful. And so if we have Spanish cases in a particular semester, we might distribute the Spanish speakers as evenly as possible. And then we just try to look at, if somebody says on their form, I like to procrastinate, or I usually procrastinate and wait to the last minute, and somebody else says, that drives me crazy in a team, we try to put them on different teams.
Thinking about a colleague in, the humanities or the social sciences who was thinking about trying to move in this direction, to go back to our original model, which I know is in evolution now because of the gateway class isn't there. I think building team-based projects that are around real life problems, I really recommend starting by adding a unit to an existing class that's already functioning to teach content, and then trying the model of building a seminar of students who've already taken that class and had that experience. Because you can kind of filter the free riders in that way, in a really important way. And also, really importantly, you can identify people who have the capacity to do really good work in teams who may not necessarily be the best test taker or the best quiz taker, right? Or, so that actually allows you to have an open door for, rather than just taking the people who have 4.0s, an open door for students who are really going to contribute and grow in this context. The other thing I would say, now I have to remember what the other thing I was going to say was, we're talking about, logistics, right? So when you're setting up teams, like even before you get sophisticated enough to be what kind of learner are you, and not putting people on teams who can't find a time to meet and working with them even while they're thinking about the norms of how they're going to treat each other. Like, how are you going to communicate? When are you going to meet? And so the one thing that can interrupt all of our planning around who's going to be on a group is if in that first meeting they can't come up with a regular meeting time, and then we're like, okay, we're going to move things around,
you go
right?
Over here.
So that's one thing that, just a point, just to step back for 1 second. One of the requirements in this course is that the students are having a regular standing meeting outside once a week outside of class. And also they also have to have enough room in their schedule to be able to do other things that occur outside of class, like meet with their attorney and things like that. So where we have students whose schedules that's the other piece that I totally forgot about, that we sort of set up to kind of figure out, like, what do your schedules look like, so that we can try to match people up in a way that allows them to be able to find a meeting time.
And I do know of a number of instances where people plan a project-based class, don't think about this, set up groups, and then it just explodes. It's really hard to support a group when one person's never going to be there. It's basically impossible. So that's not the only logistical question. Like, a lot of logistical questions are the ones that Jessica was mentioning before. Is like, we have to do a huge amount of work with our partner to make sure that we have all the things ready for when our students need them. And it can be really stressful in the first couple of iterations with a partner when you're, you just have to trust that that's going to arrive on Monday when we need to distribute it to the students on Friday or on Wednesday. Maybe it's still stressful. I'm not sure.
It's always a little stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's partially because we often have new attorneys every time. And sometimes it's like we have new attorneys that have never worked with the IJL before. And so we have definitely built out some procedures for, knowing exactly when we're going to have an early meeting with the attorneys, having a training with the attorneys and kind of debriefing them about what the IJL is and how it works, giving them a calendar of all the dates where they can expect student work and when they have things that they're going to have to get back to the students at a certain time. And so that's really helped a lot. And we also have a really great support system we have a one liaison who's essentially in charge of ensuring, we don't have to necessarily reach out to each individual attorney if there's something that's going wrong. It's not our job. She will take on that job to make sure that those things are happening. But regardless, right, the problem is you're working with attorneys who have a very high caseload and have a lot of other things going on that are not IJL focused. And so there are always still challenges, but I think we've worked out probably the best system that we can at this point.
That was something that stood out to me when I observed your first course, was that they end that lesson and they have to find what that time is, that hour that they're going to meet outside of class. And some of them were using different apps that they were gonna I'm gonna send this out, and sometimes a student was like, oh, what is that? Can you share it with me? I don't know what that is. And just these small moments of even learning how to do that themselves, the logistics of setting up a time that works for everyone to meet. The logistics piece from my observations was huge, but one of the things I really appreciated was that worked into the assignments are the responsibility of the students to try and do a lot of the communication with their attorneys. Can you talk a little bit about how students are given that responsibility and how you guide them, but try to let them manage their relationship with the attorney?
So in the teams of 4, every person actually has a leadership role. We tried to make sure that, originally it used to be that one person sort of had this logistics leader role, and that kind of was the one role that we had.
And we would rotate it.
And we would rotate,
students,
yes, which
we
got a little,
don't recommend, actually.
Right, which we switched out. But then we thought there's a lot of other leadership roles or a lot of other places where somebody could step into a role that would really help the brief. So in addition to the logistics leader role, which I'll talk about in a second, we also have somebody who ends up being the lead editor of the brief at the end to help unify the brief and make sure everything is there together, and that's usually a law student. We have somebody who's responsible for doing the bibliography, so all of the country conditions sources have to be collected into a singular packet and PDF'd and kept in a folder so that they can be essentially delivered to the asylum officer with the brief, and that person's in charge of that and making sure of those citations. And then we have a 4th person whose job it is. Merck has this big running document of a lot of legal boilerplate language that attorneys use and lift so that they don't have to recreate the wheel all the time. And a lot of the cases that we're working on help tweak or contribute or add to that boilerplate language. So that person's in charge of looking at the new stuff that has come out of these cases and helping to add that stuff to the big boilerplate document. The logistics leader, we always make that person an undergraduate. We think that that's a really important decision and a conscious decision, so that that the conversations and the logistics don't always just automatically fall to law students, which would be a very easy thing to do. And the logistics leader is in charge of figuring out when the team is going to meet together, in charge of figuring out when the team is going to meet with the attorneys, setting the agenda for all of those meetings, and facilitating all of the meetings, the team meetings as well as the meetings with the attorney. So they are in charge of actually running the meeting with the attorney and kind of keeping it going and moving, and who's going to take notes and where's the agenda, and kind of keeping track of everything. And how are we going to communicate going forward with the attorney after this first meeting? How are we going to give them edits, sort of setting all the dates for everything and kind of keeping everything running as it should. The way we train them up for that is really that we start having these little individual meetings. So we take the logistics leaders for all the teams out, and we periodically, as we know something is coming down the pike that they're going to have to be responsible for, and we sort of have a discussion about here's what this here's what it looks like to run a meeting. Here's the kind of things you want to consider when you're trying to build an agenda and facilitate this meeting, and just not assuming that they don't know how to run a professional meeting, but also not assuming that they do.
I found it really interesting at the last couple of iterations. It may have been happening before, but the last couple of iterations in the students' final reflections, some of the students who have been logistics leaders have talked about how they have looked back at the team norms that they all discussed when they're thinking about how to run their meetings, and also thought back on the readings and the discussions we had about what make good team dynamics. I'm thinking about, well, I won't name the student, but it was one student who decided to have a little icebreaker at the beginning of every meeting that she was running. And then the other students also reflected how great that was and how they felt like it showed that she was really prepared and preparing for the meeting. So there are these moments that you hope to see where some of the abstract and theoretical conversations you have about how teams should function actually are reflected in what seems to be the most basic thing, which is the logistics. Which is a thing that it really is about meeting the needs of the team, rather than just So there's lots of assignments, and then there's all this coaching around how to do those assignments in a way that really conforms to the idea of how the group's supposed to work together.
And debriefing afterwards. The teams will come together the next class and debrief how their team meeting went with their attorney, and that also helps them inform what they might do differently the next time.
I feel like that really comes back to what you said, Amy, where you don't really get anybody complaining at the end. And I think that's because everything you just discussed is just ideal teamwork of this isn't something you can do by yourself. Everybody has a really important and relevant role. You have to come together to be successful. When there is conflict in the teams, though, what is your role?
So often, when there's conflict in the team, there's students have this space and they still feel a little reluctant to come to us because they feel like they want to work it out in the team and they feel that they're tattling. But we can usually tell, and it comes out in the scores. And so we have some over the past several semesters, we have these Google forms that kind of, if it's a scale to 1 to 7, 4's, that's not terrible, but is there something going on in this team, right? And so we will often pull people out to have conversations. We will check up with them on email and have outside conversations in office hours. We have midterm meetings where we meet with everybody individually and go over the things that are going on. And when we can really tell there's a team that needs intervention, one of us would step in and just meet with the folks, trying to see if we could figure out what was going on and then see if we could figure out how to solve the problem. So I think we feel our role is as hands-on as the students would like us to be. This semester, for example, we had a student who said, you know what, it is actually not my strength to lead the meetings, and I would love to be the bibliographer. Could I switch with the other undergrad? Yeah, that's a pretty easy problem to solve, and that team seemed to work better after we made that switch. And then sometimes we have bigger problems than that in the teams. Not too big, but there's always a little something. I don't know what you'd say about.
Yeah, in the most extreme case, we have removed students from teams.
Yes, that's true.
If it seems like there isn't a solution that's either would be fair to that individual student or to their benefit, or really fair to the others in the group. In the most extreme case, that student actually left the class.
Yes.
So because everything is planned well, or we try and plan well, doesn't mean that you don't end up with bad actors, or with people who just are not going to conform to the expectations of the work together. In other instances, it's about trying to figure out what the issue is, and oftentimes I think it's a student. It could be like a student who was tasked with something but doesn't really know how to do that task, and doesn't know how to say that to their teammates, and so the teammates just perceive them as not doing what they were asked to do. So a lot of times it can really just be about the intellectual support, the support for doing the tasks that they're doing, and oftentimes also a conversation with some of the leadership in that group. Oftentimes it's like there's maybe a very experienced law student who doesn't exactly know what to expect of an inexperienced undergraduate and how much to press for more. And so that can really become our role. We can press, but we can also say to that student, to the more experienced student, this student is probably only going to get to here. Are you comfortable taking it from there? Lead editor, are you comfortable taking this text and really going ahead and editing it when it needs to be edited? That's going to be okay.
I think the other place that where we see the most conflict, and it's not necessarily intentional conflict, but it is where when work originally gets distributed, it's distributed in a way where everybody thinks everybody's getting an equitable amount of work. But then when people actually start to research and write, things crop up that causes that distribution to sort of tilt, and then somebody ends up with, feeling like they have a lot more work than somebody else, there's that sometimes that creates a little bit of tension because this is how we distributed at the beginning, and should we go back and renegotiate that distribution? And so some of that is just also us teaching around the idea of flexibility, and we trying to build in the norms, and that again, like making sure our logistics leader is constantly having the teammates check in with their workload and being flexible to redistribute things when that's needed to make sure that that everybody has a fair distribution of the work.
Or they have something that comes up and crops up in the semester and everybody's filling in, and just making sure everybody feels okay about that. Usually, yes, there's a student that everybody's supporting just a little bit more because he or she is struggling in some way, and everybody understands that. And sometimes there's a little bit of harder feelings about that because you're taking on more work. And so having those conversations, sometimes you can just tell in the room. You can just tell in the room that this person is sitting off from their teammates and that the dynamics are off, right? So when there's work time, you can sometimes tell that the teams aren't interacting with each other. And so that might be maybe they're not interacting well. I feel like we had that this semester at the beginning, and we realized, nope, they were totally fine. And we were reading into it. And so we were not correct in that. We checked in with everybody and everybody was good. And then we've had other times where it's like, oh no, we were right. That dynamic in class is showing up in the team. And so the intervention was warranted.
I think my favorite of all of the reflections that we've ever got was the student who said, I think the way that we most learned how to do teamwork was watching our instructors work together as a team. And I would say that if I were a lone faculty member thinking about designing a project-based class and watching us, I'd be like, well, how am I individually going to have time to do all of these things that you're talking about? And so I will say a couple of things. One is make a team if you can. Like, if there's any possibility of making a team for teaching this kind of class, I think it's really a good idea because it really is a lot, right? It's fun, it's delightful, it's so invigorating. And when I was doing it on my own, it felt like trying to run a small nonprofit while also doing my job. It felt like being part of a team running a small nonprofit when we were doing it together. And the other thing that I was realizing, this gets back to the question of going down from 2 briefs to 1 brief, was just to realize that the ideal of these project-based classes that are to the benefit of a community partner is not to be the most efficient at producing the work product. You want to be efficient. You want to help as many people as you can. But in fact, it's about teaching how to do this. It's, so it would be more efficient for the 3 of us to write. We could write more briefs in a semester if we spent the same amount of time, but we would not have produced 16 students who know how to do this, right? And so it's really about reducing the amount of work product you're expecting and making the space and time for yourself, even if you're an individual instructor, but also for the students to take care of all the rest of this business. And always my mistake had been like, I can't take time away from that because we got to get on to workshopping so we can get on to the next project and find the next piece to write. And actually doing less work, but doing it in this way, I think is what I would advise. It's always going to still be hard for me. So that's why I find a team if I can.
I love that. And one thing you just said is just you're teaching the students how to do this. That's the point of the course, not the product. And you referenced grading a little while ago. And in an experiential course like this, I imagine it's kind of tricky to put a grade on the work that students are doing. What is your approach when it comes to those final grades, or how do you grade those teams? You said one of the biggest mistakes you can make in the course to get a bad grade is to not be a good teammate.
So I'd have to look exactly at our syllabus, but I think the team part of the syllabus is about 50% and the individual pieces are about 50%. And so we give the team a grade, and it's based on their evaluations of each other and how well they work together. It's based on their final product, and it doesn't have to be perfect. We are not giving these attorneys things. Occasionally we are, but often we are giving them just like a really, really, really good rough draft. And then they're going to have to put, they've had a couple chances to edit, the attorneys have, but they'll keep editing, they'll add things. Sometimes clients don't always get, their relationship with the client is still developing, and so they're still getting information from the client, which will change the brief ultimately, and that's not something that fits that well into the semester sometimes. So anyway, the brief is not, it's got the cover on it, it's got everything, and it's not done. It's a rough draft. So that's what they're producing. But we can give that a grade because we know what we expect. Especially after several semesters of doing this, we don't expect perfection. We expect just a really strong draft, maybe the best they could produce in a semester. And so we can give a grade to that. And then we give a grade to how well we perceive that they work together based on our conversations with each team member and their evaluations of each other. And sometimes one of the questions we ask is everybody, basically the question is everybody carrying their weight? And if it seems like consistently there was one person who just didn't do as much, maybe that person gets a slightly lower grade, but not in the team-based grade, in the individual grade. So that the team gets a grade for what we perceive as the team's work. And that does bring along maybe somebody who free rode. But then the individual pieces, we have several individual reflections across the time. We have class participation certainly helps. And this, how did your team perceive your effort? That piece goes into the individual grade. I was rusty on this because we haven't graded since last semester, and we're about to have to, but it's not time yet. So we have both of those inputs of the individual and the team. And generally speaking, for almost everybody, the grade is really secondary. Like I said, the undergraduates come to this realization maybe later than the law students do, that really what matters is helping this client and doing the very best work they can. And so they're very sincere. They really want to do a good job, and they're all working very, very hard. It's a 3-credit class, but it's not a 7-credit class. It's significant, but they have other things going on too. And so they're putting in a lot of hours for those 3 credits, and they generally are doing a really excellent job. So grading in the end doesn't turn out to be, there might be a couple of close cases, but in the end doesn't turn out to be that agonizing.
I would like to ask about the difference between the individual and the team grade. Can you tell me what goes into that team grade?
So part of it is, like how that, well, I mean, as Amy said, right, it's like, what does this final product look like? And what did the final product look like over the iterations of this through the semester, right? Did the team, did the team manage to meet all their deadlines? Or if there were deadlines that couldn't be met, right, was there advance notice that the deadline was going to have to be pushed? Was there communication to the attorney? Was, how essentially did the team function in sort of walking through the steps necessary to ultimately produce the work? And obviously that also kind of goes in, like, when we usually sit in on those initial meetings with the attorneys, we're usually copied on the email traffic between the team and the attorney. And so how does that communication look? What's the team doing in response to attorney feedback? How are they incorporating that feedback into the next draft of their work? How is the team managing itself in terms of redistributing work and getting things edited and wrapping things up? And then as Amy said, right, what is the quality of the actual, like, ultimate brief that they submit? Again, recognizing that it's not necessarily going to be in fileable form, but particularly depending on the complexity and the number of issues of the brief and sort of the novelty of the legal issue, is it the best that we could have expected from this team in this time frame that they had?
All those things are factors, but the reality is most teams get full points. Would you say that's right?
Yes. Well.
No?
last semester we had one we gave less points to for the whole brief because it wasn't as
right. So not turning your brief in on time, not doing a final version of it, like could do it.
Right.
So any of these things are a place where a team could fall down, but mostly it's not like a very complex rubric where we're working out, you know, it's mostly like most of the teams are satisfying that 50 points. And then, you know, and also you don't want to ding one individual just because their team didn't function perfectly right. So then the where the rubber hits the road for most individual grades is, did you turn in your reflections? Did you turn them in a timely way? Did you take them seriously?
Did you attend class?
Attendance is big.
Did you attend class? Like those are all the, you know, those are, it becomes actually an easier grading job because that pretty much gives you, like it actually kind of matches up because the individuals who are not doing that tend to be in groups that are not succeeding in that way. And then there's this middle category of like, where you know, do we have pretty good evidence that you were also letting your group mates down or dominating or doing something else that was harmful in the, you know, from a professional perspective. I guess attendance is a professional grade rather than a reflection grade, right? If you're not attending or you're late regularly, you're not attending your meetings, you're late to your meetings, all those kinds of things are relatively easy to quantify. And we get to a point where it's like, if you've got a couple of those things, that's going to be and a couple of things over here, that's going to pretty much reduce your grade.
Well, and if working together as a team is essential to getting the brief done, it makes sense that by the end of the course, most teams are receiving full points.
Yeah.
Because if they're not doing these things along the way, there's so much responsibility that's on them that makes this work that it wouldn't be working.
That's right. So the final product especially, but the inputs along the way, the final product really tells us, does the team deserve a good grade? And sometimes, you know, it looked a little rough along the way, but they pulled it together to pull together a pretty good final product. And we often give that full points on the team grade just because we might talk about, well, they struggled, but like in the end, what they're giving their attorney is within the range of what we thought was reasonable, you know. And so, grading is, I said this earlier, not our favorite thing, but it doesn't turn out to be all that agonizing either. We have a couple of rubrics we give the students. We set all the expectations. We have a conversation where they annotate the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, thanks to your suggestions. And we make sure they understand where the grade is going to come from. And then we let that recede into the background because it's also not the most important thing for us. And so we tell them what we expect, but then we don't apply a rubric to each and every reflection. Mostly it's just, did you reflect and did you turn it in? We respond with comments, but we don't respond with a grade. And we're not calculating the grade along the way or being really, we could, but it's hard. It's a little bit hard in a team setting. If Jessica would do one reflection and I would do the next one. I mean, we could come up with a way to be the same, but it also doesn't feel necessary. It feels like a lot of extra work signifying nothing because in the end, it's going to come out about the same. Is that? Yeah,
although I would say that there have been a few cases where we've seen, oh, this person is probably going to get a lower grade because these reflections are not particularly intense. We need to let that person know.
Yes,
because they just may not know.
That's right.
Because if we just say, oh, that was an interesting point, which is the way we kind of respond in general, like, I like what you said about this. Have you thought about that? Then we're not letting them know, actually, our expectation is higher than this. So, but again, that's fairly rare.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is it too short? Is it too surface? Is it not significant enough? Sure, we will absolutely flag that. Not proofread. It's, you know, we will flag that stuff. We are not assigning it points, and we are not then having to, each and every time the student submits something, wait for the other instructors to take a look too so that we can all agree on a grade. Because in the end, it's usually grading's a pretty blunt force thing. A minus, B plus. Like it's not 91, 92, 93, and we're assigning that. And so it doesn't turn out to, I think, increase the accuracy to spend too much more time being really numerical about it.
Right.
Do you guys think that it would be better if we could just make everybody pass-fail? Or do you think that
students wouldn't take it?
No.
Law students wouldn't take it.
Nope. Trust me, I teach other pass-fail class.
it's not possible for them to be amassing points towards that grade over the course of the semester, is still functioning to keep the whole thing going.
I think so, but I think it goes back. I really think it goes back to Amy's point, is that because by the end of the course, the students are not in it for the grade anymore. They might come to the class because they've never had a course where they have had something that was so meaningful happen during the course that essentially left the grade in the dust. And I do think here that by the end, the students care so much about doing the work well that the grade is sort of just like this, like, potential icing on the cake or less flavorful icing. I don't know, but like it doesn't matter as much as the actual work that they're doing.
Also, I have not in this class, in 6 semesters of teaching it, had anyone come and complain about their grade at the end, which I think is rare for courses, right? Do you get complaints about grades that you give out in undergraduate?
Sure.
Law school, great. Jessica doesn't teach a graded course, and I teach a 1-credit graded course, so I don't get much of this either. But law school grades definitely generate complaints from law students. And we haven't had that. I mean, partly because I think the grades are relatively high because the quality of work is high because they're working really hard.
So one of the other strengths of this course model is that students get real experience and they learn real disciplinary skills. Can you describe maybe 1 or 2 activities that you do in the course that develop those disciplinary skills for students? And it might be different for the undergrads than the law students.
So one of the things that we do is, so again, because I teach first-year law students otherwise, my sort of understanding of having students who are new to legal writing allows us to kind of craft a simultaneous exercise where the law students and the undergrads can work together to sort of figure out what a legal analysis structure should look like. And so a couple of different things happen. They prep for it with the undergraduates watching a couple of videos that sort of are the videos that I would give to my first year legal writing students at the beginning of their first semester about what is the structure of legal writing, what does it look like, how is it ordered, when can it change. The upper level students are given a refresher of that, so just a reminder because they may have forgotten the actual structure now that they've internalized it. And then when they come into the class, we work through an exercise where there is a disorganized legal writing framework and analysis that's sort of just like piecemeal together. And their job is to work as a team to order it in the proper structure so that the conclusion comes first, the law comes second, the application of the law comes at the end. And I think it works really well together. Even it never ends up just being the law students who are sorting it out because it's a little bit amorphous, and they don't necessarily always remember the original structure. So I think it works really well for them to come together, and actually everybody seems to be very involved in trying to like order that. And then I think we look at how the next step of that is to look at how that system gets tweaked and changed when you're writing an asylum brief and the parts that kind of fall away or get modified. And so then we take that skill and move it on to sort of like trying to identify those same portions in an asylum brief and where they're missing, why are they missing, or where might they be hidden because they're not as explicit as they might be when you're sort of first learning the structure.
I think our frame for each and every one of the skills we're trying to teach is to try to be as interactive as possible. So we try to have them moving things around either in a Google document or literally I spent a 3-hour class cutting out pieces of cardstock so that they could tape them onto the board in the structure that the asylum argument takes. And so we try to take what we're going to be doing and make it as well fun and interactive and hands-on as possible. And so there's a lot of exercises that have markers and paper and just an opportunity for them to work together that isn't just let's sit down and write. Okay, let's sit down again and write. And we give them work time to work on their brief or work on what's due next, to work on the substance, but we do try to give them something interactive. And we've always done a bit of a flipped classroom model with the substantive content. So the substantive content, I would say the fundamentals of asylum law, we give them videos for that, and then we have more of a discussion in class. And so I think that's what we're doing in the classroom.
So it's what's interesting for the undergrads, I think it's clearly there's like a double set of exposures that are happening. Like on the one hand, they're learning about what law school looks like. Particularly what experiential learning in law school looks like, right? They're not really getting a view of what doctrinal class work is going to be like. We don't do the Socratic method. I talk with them a little bit of that in other classes just because it's an interesting thing for them to understand. But they really, I think more than other undergraduates, many of whom want to apply to law school have an understanding of what legal training on the experiential clinical side will look like for them. And that's actually helps drive their choices about where to go and what to do. And oftentimes whether or not to go to law school, right? Which is great. I mean, we have an alumna who is now in a creative writing program, and I was able to actually write a letter of recommendation saying, like, I actually think the skills here of trying to craft a story about a childhood trauma are very similar to some of the creative writing that I've seen this particular person doing, and that's a really interesting. You wouldn't think that a legal class would be really speak to whether somebody was going to be a great creative writer. We've had students go on to do ed degrees, higher ed degree, a special ed degree. So there's a lot of students who just got into medical school. I didn't tell you this yet. Students who come in and have come out with all kinds of reasons to go into other directions, but a lot of them are going to go to law school and they have a sense of what that looks like much more than they would otherwise. And they know some law professors.
And law students who actually serve as mentors for them. Who
become mentors and are friends and oftentimes can remain friends. The way that they are friends is, especially in the COVID era, they never even met these people. So they're just as close to them now when they're living on opposite coasts as they were when they were in class together. So that's one thing. But the other thing that undergraduates are learning that are actually applicable in all different kinds of ways, and I think I maybe until this conversation I wouldn't have known how to put it into words, is applied research, right? So we teach them how to do research in an academic setting, in which we say this is a kind of a mock scholarly question that you should go out and do. And then we tell them and figure out an argument. And that's really hard and it's a good skill to learn. But in this case, what they have to do is learn what would be a useful argument, understand the terms, the framing that the legal system gives to what is actually applicable or not applicable, and then go out and learn about a place and try and figure out which aspects of this incredible complexity that you're researching are actually useful to this very specific set of arguments. And also understand all the things you're leaving out and what that might be problematic about that. But that is a real difficult skill that you see them struggling with and learning. I've learned all this about this. I need to start from the beginning. No, you don't. You need to start from the thing that's the most useful. I don't know how to frame this. Will you frame it? Because it's framed based on what the structure of the usefulness of it. So that might be for the law, or it might be for any one of a number of other spaces where they could be a consultant, or they could be working in industry. They could be working in we could be working for a library or a museum, and they need to solve a particular research problem and try and figure out which of the things that they couldn't go out and find, actually it makes sense for them to spend time on, and then how to write that up. And that is a skill that is really, I see them teetering into the swimming pool as they're in this class.
Well, and I think they're assisted in that as well. One of my favorite activities to observe is the bullet points for the resume at the end of the course. So it's not just, okay, you did this course, it's over, but you went through this course and you developed these transferable skills that are going to be really important. And can we workshop those together and have you leaving here with something that you can actually put on a resume? And then I know because of the grant, there are also very real opportunities for students to gain employment after this. Can you speak to some of the things that students end up doing after IJL?
So we have a couple of different ways that students can stay involved with the IJL after they're done with the class. The grant leaves room for some students to essentially do additional project work for pay. Students can also sometimes do that work for credit, and so kind of balance those. And the projects really vary widely. We have been working on, for example, a number of country conditions packets for various countries and also various protected grounds in Afghanistan that end up at the immigration court's help desk, so that people who, unlike unaccompanied children, adults who are not afforded representation necessarily, can come and potentially get a packet that they can use and sort of attach to their asylum application that would supplement some of the concerns that are going on in their country. And so essentially would be at least something that would supplement their application rather than just being a sort of a bare bones application. We've also worked on a number of guides that are being distributed into the detention centers that are essentially informing asylum applicants of what their rights are, and they're really amazingly well done, and they're in many different languages. So that's been a really big project. We have another guide project that we're working on right now that's for kids and what they need to know about potential law enforcement interaction, and then also including little cards that they can give to law enforcement if they end up having an interaction. And then we've just had like a lot of other projects where, people are just continuing to work on briefs where, people have just like, I really just enjoyed writing country conditions and working with, somebody who's a law student and pairing up and working on briefs together. And then obviously there was the boilerplate project, which I mentioned earlier, which was the brainchild of one of the attorneys at Merck, but where the IJL had a lot of instrumental help getting it off the ground before the Merck could actually take it over as funding it itself. But essentially it was just this very large document that's full of, current legal boilerplate language that everyone at Merck can draw from so that they're not, so they can be more efficient in their brief writing.
There's no shortage of ideas that our partner has for how they can use student help. Sometimes our students, separate and apart from IJL, might go and work directly for Merck. So we have some IJL alums who've gotten jobs as either attorneys, staff attorneys. We've had a couple of that, and then we've sometimes had students do that as legal assistants for paid work, a full-time either summer internship. But we've had some law students who have gone to work at Merck. And then we sometimes have former IJL students who end up at Michigan Law, so that we'll see them around, and now they're law students, which is very cool, when they were undergrads in IJL. They go on to, like Jesse said, they go on to a wide variety of things. But as far as sticking with the Immigrant Justice Lab space, I think that covers it.
So we're probably have time for 2 more questions. So hopefully our audience is really excited about doing something similar. And if they are, what advice would you give a faculty member who's hoping to design a course that has this experiential learning component in it?
I suppose the place to start is it needs to be a marriage between something that you are excited about and something the community needs. What's really special about this is law students have worked on asylum briefs in various capacities. In my experience, I'm as the externship director for a long time, but the idea of bringing undergraduates into that work to do the history part, which they are expert at, is a really special innovation. And I'm sure that innovation exists across all sorts of disciplines where there is an unmet need in the community that this university or any other university has some capacity in. So I can't quite come up with full examples, but there are all sorts of unmet needs in the community that the university could have expertise on. And I think it would take somebody like Jesse saying, I really want to do something practical that helps the community in addition to teaching students this really important. They were just jazzed up. Like, they found out how horrible our immigration laws and what a horrible place they came from, and they were motivated to do something about that, and you were too. And so just that marriage of something you're passionate about with an unmet need seems like the best place to start. That may be hard to come up with just in your kitchen or at your desk, but maybe you start by talking to community partners about what those needs are. I don't know how you.
I think it's a really delicate balance, because the last thing that we want to do as undergraduate teachers is like unleash our untrained and sometimes like still developing young minds on community partners. And also you have to think about scale, right? Because you want to do this semester after semester, right? So the idea is not to like dump a bunch of people on a community project without a lot of community input, for the benefit of our students this semester, and then they disappear. So there's a lot that has gone into the being able to develop this. And one thing that just occurs to me is that the professional schools oftentimes have these relationships and ongoing projects. So maybe a thing to do for undergraduate teachers is to be thinking also about which professional schools are already have projects going on that undergraduates can fit into and with the skills that they have. And the other thing I would just say is like as compelling and inspiring to me as it is to work on real cases with real real problems that are community defined, I think it is not the first thing to reach for, right? I think the first thing to reach for is something like what we did with the human trafficking clinic. Can we borrow the work that you did and do it as an exercise, right? Can we start, and then let's see how students are doing with that, and let's see how we do as teachers of that before we did all kinds of moments we've committed to being like, yeah, I think I can learn how to teach that, or like I can figure out how to teach that if you need that. But that can be a precarious place to be when you're trying to figure out how to like meet community needs. And so maybe the easiest lift for undergraduate experiential learning is to try and figure out if there are potential partners over time who have non-time sensitive, non-high stakes kinds of tasks that they can pass along to really get the whole system lubricated and really start figuring out how it is all going to work.
Absolutely. If I were designing the perfect law school, it's 3 years, law school is 3 years, I would have students do simulations first. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing. And there are lots of simulation classes at law school that you pretend write a contract, you pretend draft a complaint, a fake complaint based on real life problems. We have whole classes called problem solving initiatives. You pick a problem that's out in the world and you have interdisciplinary teams, in this case, work on that problem, but you don't have a client for that solution. You might have community input or stakeholders come and listen, but it's not a real problem that you're putting out in the world. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I would make first year has a lot of this already. Jessica's legal practice space has a lot of simulations, a moot court, a mock trial, a fake thing that you do first. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And then to finish the thought, in my second and third year of my law school, you would do clinic in the second year, because clinic is where the professors take the cases, but you take tiny little caseloads so the students can do all the things, and they first chair it, and they, at every decision point, they have an attending physician in the medical model to ask about how to do this, and they do a lot of work for a few clients. And then in the third year, you might go out into the world and do things, and that's where externships would come in, where students are working out with community partners in spaces. Anyway, nobody asked me to design a law school, but I think in a similar vein, you would start in the simulation space and then you would move into those kind of heavier lifts. And then Jesse's advice about creating a team, I think, is
definitely. But I mean, the same model could be true for undergraduates, right? So you could imagine that undergraduates have simulation spaces in larger classes that have content that is also important to it, and that they have opportunities not in a clinic but in a lab in which there's a faculty-led project where the relationship with the community partner is managed by the faculty member, and there are only very specific tasks within that undergraduates are. But so it's not we're going to build a website in one semester. It's not we're going to solve this in one semester. It's in this semester, you are going to engage with an ongoing project that is going to be managed by a faculty member and is going to be able, it's going to and you guys are going to be able to build it and do all kinds of incredible things to it, but you're not going to see it to fruition, because then we're on a timeline that's unrealistic. Totally. And I've seen that happen over and over again in these kinds of projects, right? You have to rush to the finish line rather than thinking, oh, the finish line is a long way in the future. And then they can do individual projects. They can write senior theses that are community based. They can develop their own relationships out of those, or they can stay on as independent study, and really take leadership on those. You could totally imagine that. That's not for one faculty member to develop, but you could imagine one faculty member or a team of them could be thinking about, well, I really want to work on the simulation part and see where that goes, or I really want to try and develop my own community partnership where I'm going to have regular opportunities for undergrads to come in and teach a seminar around that,
I think the other piece of advice I would have is just really to be, thinking flexibly about anything that you actually might generate, just being able to be really flexible about what that might look like next time. Like every iteration of the Immigrant Justice Lab has been different from the semester before, sometimes drastically different. And it's been over, 4 years now, five plus years now, right? And And it's just about being able to say, like, yes, that last model was good in these ways. It wasn't that great in these other ways. We're going to tweak it to make it different this time, and kind of continuing to sort of push that envelope forward to try to create new things because all the great ideas that you might have in your head the first time you want to execute something might not actually end up coming out as good as you thought they would. And if you're not flexible about being able to retool it, then you're not going to get as good of a final result.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing the experience teaching this course, designing the course with us. I would like to close with knowing, what are the goals for the course moving forward?
Well, we have lost Jessie to the world for now. So this semester we have a new undergraduate instructor, Melissa Borja. I think some of our goals for the future are really to continue to drive interest in the IJL, to continue to get exposure for the IJL in the university and in the community at large, and hopefully eventually maybe to find some way to partner with Jessie's new institution.
I'll just add, I think that there's also space for maybe other, it doesn't just have to be the same three people every semester. Maybe there's space for different law school professors to cycle in. Maybe there's space for other LS&A or other disciplines on campus to cycle in and bring their skill set. Those aren't explicit goals. Those are just, ideas. For now, the goal is to continue to do good work with the few briefs we do as well as we can do, so that that work can be shared. There's something we tell our students a fair amount, that like plagiarism in law is okay. If somebody has written something really well in a brief, just lift it. And the undergraduates' minds are a little blown by that. And so, but that's true for Merck. If we write a good brief, everybody, it raises all of the other boats at Merck so that they can use it in other briefs. So continuing to be that partner for them. I don't know what goals you have.
So for the last several years, so at the beginning it was about getting it started, and then it was about getting the law school involved, and then it was about figuring out how to do that all together, and then it was about adjusting the model. And for the last couple of years, for me personally, the two big goals have been important. One is managing a transition, with the expectation that I and also the person who had been leading the charge at Merck were both, even if we weren't going to necessarily be gone, we wanted to make sure that this was a project that was bigger than our relationship with each other, that this was a project that if we stepped out of would continue. And it's actually kind of miraculous that that's been the case, that this is the IJL is as strong as ever, and it's without the two people who started it. And that's really exciting, and trying to figure out how the institution can be pushed to get to now recognize that it is a thing that's more than just an individual faculty member and an individual member at Merck, and support it in a fuller way. I think remains, it won't be my task, but it remains an important goal. And then the other thing is starting again, because I'll be at a new institution with potentially new partners and a whole new kind of panorama. Immigration law is completely based on what part of the country you live in, asylum laws in particular. And so trying to think about that and think about, and so that, I guess I should say, I said two, but there are three. And the third thing we'd be working on, and this because you've been part of it, is to try and develop more materials that would be useful to other people on other campuses who wanted to start immigrant justice labs, or on this campus who would want to start any kind of a lab-based instruction, where we take all of the activities that we do and all of the materials that we've developed over time and the strategies we've developed, and try and make them more legible than what a syllabus would look like. And so that the goal there is in some ways to continue to finish that, and then to try and figure out how we can continue to make it available and see if we can actually get not just Michigan and Harvard to have immigrant justice labs, but other places to take this on, or to create new models, with this idea that feed ideas back to us in interesting ways.
And in that vein, we did have a conference last summer where we did bring in people from other institutions who were interested in this work, and as part of that created a Canvas course that does capture a lot of the exercises that we do, that is available to people who are interested in looking at it.
Great. Well, thank you again so much. I appreciated the opportunity to share what you're doing, because it's just been amazing to get to watch it as an observer.
And participant.
And
You participated.
participant.
We have made Caroline instruct the class sometimes.